we'll kick off in another time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the second one.
and we have 15 minutes allocated for people logging in anyway, so that should be okay. Over to you, Isa.
The meeting started.
Right. Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're still waiting for a couple of people to join, and we want to make sure that everyone is a part of the conversation. So please bear with us, and we'll give some time to other friends and colleagues to join in the conversation.
As Nada here, I think there is some sort of confusion about whether I'm in or not. So I'm just kind of saying that I'm here.
Hi, Nada. Thank you for letting us know.
No, that's
I
fine.
think we're just waiting for one other colleague, and then we will kick off. So maybe just give him a few more minutes.
Sounds good.
Right. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Isa Meyer, and I am the Global Next Generation Portfolio Manager at the British Council. On behalf of the British Council, it is my pleasure to welcome you all this evening for this panel discussion that's going to be centered around British Council's Next Generation Sudan research. Before we kick off, I'd like to give you a brief introduction of what the Next Generation series is. The Next Generation series is essentially British Council's flagship program. It's a global research and engagement initiative that's aimed at gaining a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that young people are faced with. We try to get a deeper sense of what their aspirations are and what their aims and ambitions are. And we do so with the hope of informing programming and policy that would help us empower young people. Since it was launched in 2009, we've conducted this research in over 20 plus countries around the globe, and we've managed to engage 50,000 plus young people. In many cases, this research has been quite instrumental in informing and designing new programs, but also engaging various government stakeholders in critical conversations. The Next Generation Sudan, in particular, is the result of a rigorous and thorough process at a very significant moment in Sudan's history. This research aims to amplify the voices of Sudanese youth, providing them a platform to share their views and their concerns, and to also co-create recommendations for an effective way forward. It aims to capture the very essence of Sudan's youth, showcasing their resilience in conflict, their creative spirit in adversity, and their enduring optimism for a fairer, more democratic, and prosperous Sudan. And so, on behalf of myself and the organizing team, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today to join us in this very important conversation. Before I go off to introduce the panel and start the discussion, we'd like to share a brief video that showcases the top line findings from the Next Generation research. Just to let you know that this research is public access and you can read the full report on the British Council's Research and Insights website. Can I request Amna to please play the video? Thank you. There you have it, a brief overview of key findings from the Next Generation Sudan. To further explore the research findings, I'm very pleased to invite a very vibrant group of young people and experts to talk to us about what it is that young people in Sudan can do for a better, more prosperous and peaceful future. I'd like to, first of all, introduce Mona. Mona, if you could turn your camera on and introduce yourself, please.
Hi Bears, thanks Azra. Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Muna Ibrahim. I'm a researcher and policy engagement advisor at the University of Oxford with a background in medicine in Sudan.
Thank you. We also have with us today Nada. Nada, over to you.
Hi, Azza. My name is Nada Ali. I teach law at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. I've done a lot of research on Sudan. I'm interested on a number of aspects of what is happening there. Some of my research is on environmental issues, but mostly I work on conflict and international law.
Thank you and welcome. We also have a third panelist with us today who's unfortunately experiencing some sort of technical difficulty, so he will be joining us shortly. But I'm very pleased to introduce Hatem Hassan, who is the co-founder and executive officer of the Social Enterprise Sudan Association. Hatem is deeply committed to the vision of change making through youth empowerment, and he strives to drive impactful programs that promote social entrepreneurship and foster community development across Sudan. So while we wait for him, we'll jump right into the conversation. We find that in the next generation research, we find that there is a perception that youth voices are not effectively heard at national level, and that this is a very critical problem. This can lead to disenchantment with the political process, potentially causing apathy. On the other hand, it could also motivate the youth to seek more innovative, perhaps even disruptive ways to make their voices heard. So I'll go to Mona first with this question. Mona, what can be done to more effectively incorporate youth perspectives into national decision-making processes?
That's a really good question. And honestly, it starts with the findings. It starts with the frustration and the anger that you found in your results. Young people care about the country, and it's really the time that the country cares back. So even after this war, we can see across the country, youth are still bearing the brunt of risk, whether it's exposure to violence, school dropout, gendered risks like child marriage in women, like violence exposure and militarization in young boys. So still, despite all the pushes and the stories of resilience over the past decade, Sudan is still forgetting about the young people. And the problem is that most of the country is young. Almost 70% of the country are under 30 years old. So when we're talking about young people, we're not talking about the future generation, we're talking about the generation that we're in right now. So in order to start really dissecting what is the national decision-making process, which is an extremely complicated topic in Sudan, we should start by asking what is our responsibility to young people immediately during relief mechanisms? How can they be included in humanitarian programming? How can social assistance be more age sensitive? How can they be provided with income generating activities? How can they be supported in caring responsibilities? Your findings do indicate that a majority of young people are carers. They have been forced to become adults before they are actually adults. So that's the first step to start. Meet the basic needs. Food security, provide cash transfers, provide housing to those who need it, to the millions who are displaced. The second part of this is actually matching what the market provides with what young people want to do. And that is the long-term challenge here. And I don't think this can be done through one process. I think it has to go from local to global, even within communities, localization councils, local government, humanitarian aid commissions, sort of local providers can consider meaningfully engaging youth as co-leaders, not as people who are just told what to do, but as meaningful community partners. On a national level, this can reflect as civil society partnerships. On a regional level, how often do we see Sudanese people represented regionally, whether it's in the African Union or across the MENA region? And of course, internationally, making sure that international programs are accurately reflecting the age pyramid in Sudan.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I think that young people have really been at the forefront of a lot of that's been happening in Sudan anyway. So there is that potential there. There is that drive there. There is an understanding of what is needed and what is wanted for them to succeed. But the question, and you rightfully pointed that the decision-making process in itself is a little bit convoluted right now, and people are not entirely sure how to go about it. So what is it that young people can do in the interim? What are some steps that they can take to potentially address this and to be involved in policy and the decision-making process?
It starts with their communities. So it starts with where they're living. It starts with how they're being represented among their own communities. And youth have already, over the past year, proved that they are one of the most adaptable social capitals in the country. With how fast they have become frontline responders, with how fast they have led the evacuation, the safety, the responses to this conflict. I think they have earned sort of the right to be seen as community leaders. Now, just being at the table isn't a lot to ask. It's the bare minimum. And I think that it's not enough to just think about youth voices being represented. It's about time we go to the next step where we can see them representing their own voices in these spaces, not people speaking on their behalf. I also think that while youth do seem to be doing everything they can around the country, despite all the turbulence, all the kind of problems around them, we also have a responsibility not to shift all this burden back to them. International organizations can stop seeing young people as subcontractors and sort of delivery agents, but more as meaningful participants. Even based on your study now, you hold a perfect example. Co-design is key here. So as people around the country think about reopening schools, think about reforming the health system, think about sort of what to do about the surges of violence, it's worth taking a step back and asking who's on the table. Because if there's no young people there, then that's a big red flag.
Yeah, I mean, that's two very valid, very excellent points, is that yes, young people should be involved, but they shouldn't be burdened because they are still young people and there is, much to be learned and a lot of growth to be sort of experienced. And then at the same time, the future is now, like you said yourself, the future leaders are young people right now. So there's really no time to stop and waste and think about it. I think I'm just going to ask you one other question though on this, is that what sort of platforms in your opinion can we or can help young people have a voice? So let's say that they finally managed to get a seat at the table. How do we make it more impactful? How do we make it more meaningful? And that it's not just tokenistic in nature to put a young person on the table, but how do we bring that sort of mind shift?
I think it's going to be a slow burn, but there has to be a social norms shift across the country. So this starts from all levels of community, whether it's sort of the religious leaders in the community, whether it's sort of community leadership that is related to sort of tribal, racial, ethnic backgrounds. That needs to be the starting points. There needs to be systematic engagement to change how young people are seen. That doesn't happen overnight. Social norms intervention do work in a very slow manner, but at the very least, we should start talking about schools and employment, the two platforms that matter the most to young people. So, and accurately matching that to then what the job market looks like in the context. But to go back to your question, it does completely matter who is making these decisions, who is changing communities where they are. And we already see sort of across the country, the frontline responders are not just youth, but they are extremely coordinated. We see examples like the emergency response rooms, like the national civil society organizations that have been leading relief, WASH, violence prevention, advocacy on all levels, while taking care of their own families. And the one message I have for these groups is that we're all louder together. It does matter that people start to collaborate. It does matter to have a unified voice, because the sooner that happens, the sooner the entire country can catch up.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the youth participation had sort of spiked, and after the 2018 revolution, young people are sort of at the forefront of organizing protests and community forums and what have you. And that in itself is a testament of what you said, we're louder together. And at some point, when you have enough collective voices, it becomes very difficult to ignore and overlook. So I agree with you on that front. On that note, improving the security and conflict situation, economic improvement, education, promoting tolerance, and on, and some of the other key political issues that resonate with Sudanese youth. They've sort of, been really vocal about it, and they've been vocal about what they want and what would help them. Yet still, when it comes to feeling actually empowered and like they're being heard, a vast majority feel like they're not being heard at all. And so I'm going to shift to Nada now, if that's okay, and see why is that and what can be done to remedy that? Why is it that young people are not feeling truly empowered, even when they're at the, the leading force, if you will?
So thank you very much for, first of all, I would like to thank the British Council for doing the research in the first place, because as I told your colleagues before, somebody had to ask young people what they think. I think the reason they feel unempowered and unheard is because they are. So if you have a look roughly at what happened in the country between 2018 until the outbreak of this all-out war, what we had is like clear evidence of young people being able to mount organized collective action that is very well planned, that makes effective use of social media, that is capable of policy formulation, but also capable of critical thinking and an analytical view of what is going on in the political scene in Sudan. And despite these various skills that they have kind of demonstrated along a very long period of time, when it came to the political process post the revolution, the youth movement was completely disenfranchised and marginalized. So there is also a question of why does that happen and what is the impact of that in a country like Sudan. I think your research also shows that there is a great deal of a generational gap between young people and the older generation, who are by default perhaps are now the decision makers when it comes to things like politics in Sudan. And I think it's very important to actually sit with that as well, to sit with the realization that young Sudanese people espouse values and ethos that are completely different from the older generation. So as Muna said, unless we enable participation, by young people in these forums, then we will not be able to reflect their needs, basically. But throughout the unfolding of the revolution and the first years of the transitional government, a lot of the demands of young people have been ignored, right? Including on things like justice, accountability, the participation of women, all of these issues that are particularly important to them, but also things like adopting radical economic policies that benefit the communities as opposed to externally kind of outward looking policies that appease international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank. So in a sense, the sense of betrayal that young people have is reflective of what has happened in the country. I think the outbreak of the war was just the last straw in the sense that this is exactly the kind of situation that young people did not want to find themselves in. They actually foretold the possibility of conflict breaking out, and they weren't listened to either. The positions taken by the resistance committees uh, all along this historical kind of timeline actually shows that they understood the situation much better than the older generation who are making decisions. So I very much sympathize with their feeling that they're not being heard.
Yeah. That's a very valid point, because even in the research we found that you know, the family values are very, very important to young people in Sudan. But at the same time, like you said, they have sort of slightly more modern, for a lack of a better word, ethos and what have you. And so there's this constant struggle between managing the two and holding these two in tension. And so it makes complete sense that they feel unheard. And given the size of their population and given the sort of energy that they have, it does make sense that they feel like they're not being heard. But the question still remains: how do we shift that? How do we change that? Where what sort of, and I asked this question before also, what sort of platforms would help enable this? What sort of skills development or learning, or what would help?
I think talking about skills development is very important, but I think also acknowledging what young people come to the table with is also very important. So the way that I see it, and I could be wrong about this, and I think that's why we need to include young people in the conversation regarding what it is that could make their path into participation even easier. So even this question has to be referred back to them. But I think from where I'm standing, especially when it comes to the political process, what I thought was missing post the revolution was training in how they can organize themselves into political units that are separate, perhaps, or supplementary to the old political parties. Because I think most of the time, the urgent conversations that young people want to have are completely different from the old conversations that the old, for example, political parties or constellations tend to be engaged in. And I think because of these trends, if you like, in how thinking has shifted from one generation to the other, they may benefit from training in how to organize politically. But this is just from my perspective, because I'm interested in the political process. But naturally, I think there are other ways that we can help empower the youth. But I think the first step in this is to actually understand where they're coming from. So one of the reasons that young people have completely different values from the older generation is also because their own common enfranchisement in Sudan. So, for example, the model of resistance committees, which is actually a very interesting phenomena, um, happened, and it exposed young people to kind of to people from different backgrounds and different ethnicities and different perhaps religious beliefs and things like that. And it's through this exposure that the usual divisions in the Sudanese societies were transcended, because in the youth movement. And I think once we realize that this sort of exposure is necessary in order for the Sudanese society to evolve beyond the political questions that tended to hold us back, it would be important to build that sort of diverse learning experiences into whatever programs we deem relevant to the current moment, if you like. So I think a lot of the work has to also reflect on what it is that young people want, what it is that they think, how did they come to have these kind of positions, and how we can build on whatever it is that they have already in order to move forward.
Yeah, that's that absolutely makes sense. And I think that your point about, putting young people at the center of it and asking them is probably the first step, and where we should probably begin. But on that note, I think that, with the conflict and with things sort of going towards, somewhat settling down, there potentially are there likely going to be various development interventions. How can we make sure that these development interventions are, they're able to harness the cautious optimism of young Sudanese to drive a positive change, and it has more to do with what's needed and less to do with, like you said yourself, whatever the various organizational sort of priorities are. So how do we unify those efforts, if you will?
So this is a very strange question to ask me, just because I'm not an economist. So so perhaps I'm going to give you a bit of an abstract answer, if I may,
Okay.
right?
Of
I
course.
think my approach to this question is the same approach I have to the question of how can we change the political way of doing things, right? And my answer is simply to do everything that has not been done before, right? So I'm going to give you an example from Mohammed Yunus, who was discussing microfinancing. So Mohammed Yunus is currently due to take on the leadership of the transitional government in his country, and he started this program of microfinancing, which was very successful. And when he was explaining how he did it, he said, I looked at the traditional banking system and how it's run and what it usually does. And I did exactly the opposite. So bankers would go to rich people. I went to poor people. Bankers would go to cities. I went to urban and rural areas. Bankers would lend to men. I lent to women. Bankers would have lots of lawyers. We don't have any lawyers in our bank. And I decided not to ask borrowers about their history of borrowing. And I decided in their future, instead of their past. And as a result of this kind of tendency to want to see whether something else is gonna work. So basically, I think we are at an inflection point in Sudan, where we had a long history of trying to do things in a particular way that didn't work in the past. So I think my own perspective would be, maybe let's just reverse everything, So like, maybe let's actually encourage young people to be decision makers. Let's get more women into decision making. Let's focus on rural development. So basically, I think my frustration is that people seem to be revisiting the old policies as if now they will work for whatever reason. But we kind of got stuck in this continuity, while young people in Sudan obviously want change. So my own position would be, let's try something new.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, and it brings to mind Albert Einstein's quote about, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And so maybe
Absolutely.
if you disrupt from the norms and you try to do things that you haven't done before, you really might just be able to make the difference that you've been trying to. Mona, I don't want to put you on the spot, but was there anything that you wanted to add to this question, or any thoughts that you wanted to share on this?
I just wanted to add one tiny thing, because I really think you're absolutely right, Nada. We need to actually come up with a whole new way of doing things that actually fits Sudan and its ethos. But I just wanted to position this parallel to some of the debates around the humanitarian development peace nexus. I think in Sudan, youth are right in the middle of that triple nexus. It's the way to actually provide relief without undermining local systems. It's a way of providing development that sustains itself beyond international funding. It's a way to promote localized peace building in the way youth always do. So this is just to add that everyone in the international community has been debating how to deliver triple nexus approaches. And I think Nada just answered that question.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, Hatem is not going to be able to join us, which is a shame because I had a bunch of questions that I wanted to ask him, especially around entrepreneurship. This is one of the key findings that came out from our report, is that young people want to be self-employed and they want to have their own businesses and they want that sort of autonomy. But there are a lot of policies and issues around funding and financing that is sort of that doesn't really support their aspirations. And I wonder if either one of you is willing to try to respond to some of those questions. I think the first one is, there have been a lot of conversations around, when we went out into the field and we were surveying young people, a lot of them are very unhappy with the quality of education that they get. They believe that it's a way for them to succeed, but they also believe that the education that they're receiving right now is not going to benefit them in any way, shape, or form. And add to that the fact that there has been a conflict that has disrupted everything. How do we get young people back on track? How do we get them the right kind of education? What does the right kind of education look like even? And again, definitely don't answer if you don't feel like you have to, but just throwing it out there to see if we can get some creative juices flowing. Does anyone want to volunteer?
I think that I come to this from the perspective of a non-expert, right? In terms of their interest in entrepreneurship and business, I actually think that drawing lessons from what happened during the sit-in in 2019 is very instructive, right? Because young people got together and actually ran a community. And they did this by organizing businesses, small businesses, basically. They have identified supply chains. They were able to provide services, including educational services as well. So I think from my perspective, I worry about the narrative surrounding privatization and the business sector just because of its effect on the economy in Sudan in particular. So I think a better focus would be on encouraging young people to perhaps pursue things like social businesses. So these are the types of businesses that benefit the communities they come from, right? And I think training them in the type of businesses that could not just provide them with with a source of income, but also have more egalitarian kind of impact is also very important for a country like Sudan, especially now because of the complete collapse of services, right, in the country. So I think because we are gonna have to start from basically point zero, we will have to kind of encourage the type of entrepreneurship that does not necessarily prioritize profit making, but perhaps prioritizes social enterprise, right?
Social impact.
Social,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely.
And I would think that the education system, the education that will benefit this type of like long-term planning would be the type of education that includes I don't know, like things like being educated in social science, law, economics, that kind of thing. But obviously, we have a technological need, and we need to catch up with the rest of the world. So I think that would also be beneficial. So just, I mean, for me, I think like just roughly thinking about it from my perspective, I think that would be the way to go for sure.
Thank you, Nada. That makes a lot of sense. I think you're right that you know, because there's so much work that needs to be done, that a sort of social impact perspective will probably have a greater impact for the young people, for the communities that they're in, and overall the economic benefits of it as well. Mona, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that answers the question perfectly. I'll just add two other minor points. Firstly, on sort of adapting the education system itself. The education system was always geared to keep you in the education system in Sudan. So you graduate high school, the next natural step would always be university. The next natural step is to figure out how to keep that track, try to get into academia. But that track doesn't really exist in the current version of Sudan. So we need to step back and ask, why are we advocating for schools to open? And to answer this question, we'll have to address exactly what Nida just pointed out. We need to work backwards here. What jobs would young people like to end up in, and what education they would need to back that up, instead of going through the normal sort of traditional university system, which just isn't suitable for the country anymore. How often do we see a job description that requires a master's degree in the country now? So that needs to be adapted. And I really strongly believe that this conflict there's two sides of the coin. We do have an opportunity to build back differently. It really can be different after this conflict now. And people in Sudan now, young people in Sudan now, do have a really big role in shaping what that future looks like. Instead of building systems, a conflict hits and we have to rebuild the same systems over and over again. Like you said, just repeating the same cycles all over again. Why not design a system that is conflict sensitive to begin with? Sudan has been in conflict since 2003. We've been receiving humanitarian and international support since 2003. And that has been getting incrementally worse, larger, more exclusive, more armed, more dangerous over the past few decades. And so there's no reason to expect that violence will suddenly disappear. So why not build systems that are adaptable to this level of conflict? And self-employed sort of social entrepreneurships are a possible gateway to do that.
Yeah, wow, that's an excellent point. I think that there are two very excellent points there. The first one is the need to almost reverse engineer and identify what sort of jobs are needed, and then training young people accordingly. It's all well and good, and it sounds really nice to say I have an MBA, but if that MBA is not leading to a job, then it really isn't, very worthwhile, although education is great. And the second is that there is absolutely an opportunity to build better. And there has to be that sort of agility and adaptability in the system because these systems should be able to face whatever comes their way. To put it one way. I think we're unfortunately running out of time. So I'm going to just ask one or two more questions, and either one of you can answer these. I think in closing, one of the questions that I had was, the disruption really caused a lot of young people and others to sort of move out and disperse out from outside of Sudan. And many of them are now outside. What is the role that these young people who are burning and who have all of this passion and they want to contribute and do something for their communities? What is it that the Sudanese diaspora across the world, what is it that they can do to support young people in building better and building more peaceful and stronger, resilient communities?
I can just quickly jump in and answer the question with another question. And I think the other question is currently in the chat. So someone called Thureya Saleh asked how a diverse youth population can be accurately and effectively represented in Sudan. And I think the role of diaspora can be organizing. It can be starting to link up the different collaborations across the country. It's starting to use that time resource to start making these linkages across the country to lower tensions. I don't think the diaspora should be the star of the show. It's definitely those that are frontline workers in the country who should still be at the spotlight. But it starts by amplifying the voices of youth on the ground.
Great.
I think
Excellent.
Hatim's back in as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, welcome, Hatim. I wonder. Hi. So yeah, now that you're here, we can ask the expert the questions about entrepreneurship and education as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Hatim. We apologize for the technological challenges that are always just around the corner when you least need them or expect them. We've been having conversations and discussions around how we can empower young people and how do we give them a more active voice and how do we enable them to participate better in politics and community building and what have you. And for you, I had a couple of questions that were specifically around education and entrepreneurship. There's a notable enthusiasm amongst young Sudanese to start their own business, in the coming years. But they encounter significant barriers, and this includes limited access to finance. That's a big one, or lack of necessary skills and very stringent government regulations. So my question to you, Hatem, is what support mechanisms can be established to help young Sudanese overcome barriers to starting their own businesses, including limited access to finance and skills?
Hello, everyone. I'm very sorry. I'm facing technical issues. In terms of the conflict ongoing now in Sudan, it is very hard to answer this question because now everything is fragile, everything is unstable. So in the first, to find a way to create some kind of mechanism that very flexible. Most of Sudanese use now the board outside Sudan, and the others inside Sudan divided into two types. Some of them in the conflict area that very hard for them to access even the basic needs. So their priority is to survive from this conflict. The other type is the safe area between the conflict area. And
Hatem, my apologies. There are comments that say that your voice is very low. So if you can kindly speak up a little bit so the audience can hear you.
yeah, what about now?
Thank you. Much better. Thank you.
Yes. So what I said, it is very hard to answer this question regarding to the ongoing conflict in Sudan, because Sudanese youth is divided to inside Sudan and outside Sudan. The youth inside Sudan, some of them in the conflict area, that even don't have the right access to basic needs. Their priority is to survive and to keep them family or them life safe from this mad conflict. The other part, which is in the safe areas or safe states, uh, they even not like have the perfect position to access to finance, to access even to the education system. Some of them, like in the last year of their university, they can't like take the exams. So if we talk about the mechanics we are looking for, uh, first of all, programs that target them directly to support, empower them in like in skills, like life skills, soft skills, to be able like to create their own initiatives. The key point of the solution or the mechanism is them. If we empower them, create them to find ways, solution that help them, like to access to finance, access to right training, access to right like policies. So if we empower them, we will have that kind of solution. But we can help them by improving access to finance and exactly to microfinance. They can we talk about like create a completely ecosystem, a new ecosystem, establish new ecosystem, banks, private sector, uh, uh, the public sector. So we can offer them the finance to create their own businesses. Uh, we can like have other kind of fund, entrepreneurship fund, that crowdfunding or other kind of fund or seed funding. But we have to offer them the right training. We have to offer them like the right mentorship programs. We have to offer them the right incubation programs, link with the universities, link with the other programs out of Sudan. Like we all together have to sit and have this kind of discussion. What is the solution in this position or this conflict time?
That's a very valid point. I think that at this point in time, there are so many competing priorities, and it really becomes difficult to ascertain which one gets more attention and which one needs more focus. But I also agree completely that the spirit is there and it needs to be nurtured, and one of the ways to nurture it is to ensure that we're giving young people access to the right kind of training, we're giving them access to the right kind of mentors, and they don't necessarily have to be in the same country. This is something where the diaspora can come in and play a role. For instance, incubation programs and sort of how to help them navigate their way around different government regulations and policies and what have you. So that's a good point. I think that I mean, for me personally, this was one of the, the most exciting findings that came out of the Next Generation Research Report, just because it really spoke to um, the agency that young people want and how they want to take charge and be in control. And I thought it was really quite inspirational. We're going to I'm going to pose one final question to the panel, but in the meanwhile, I'd like the audience to share any questions that you might have. Please put them in the chat, and I'll put them forward to the panel as well. I think the final closing question, or let's call it a question, is what would your parting message be to young people in Sudan, especially to ones who are very keen and eager to contribute to building their communities and who have big dreams and who have, a lot of hope? What is your parting message to them? And I'd like each one of you to please very briefly respond to that. Maybe we can start with Nada.
Well, I mean, I think the difficulty with this question is that they seem to know a lot more than we do. So I do not include myself in the young people bracket. I mean, I think it has to be an injunction, perhaps not to lose faith and to keep on doing what it is that they're doing, which is being resilient and being resourceful. But to be honest, I think throughout the period of the last few years, I have personally been humbled by the ability of young people to adapt and to contribute in a very precarious situation in Sudan, especially after the breakout of the war. So I think we also need to kind of be cognizant of the fact that they actually might have more of the answers than we do. So I think that is basically my message to them, is to enlighten us a little bit more. So yeah.
That's a very valid point. I think they have been very resilient and they have been very resourceful, and their adaptability is obviously very admirable as well. Mona?
Just to mirror that reflection, I really do think the narrative needs to shift from capacity building to capacity sharing. It's not a power dynamic that should exist. It's not someone holds the information and the other doesn't. We have a lot to learn from young people. And in return, we also have a lot to do around the country, whether it's local, national, international, regional organizations. Everyone has a responsibility to help young people succeed. And I already personally believe Sudanese youth have made history before, and they will keep making history again.
Well, yep, here's hoping. And I have no doubt about that, absolutely. Hatem, over to you.
My message for all Sudanese youth, inside, outside Sudan: stay strong. Stay strong. You are able to do everything. You did it before, and you did it again and again and again. I believe we have the power, we have the knowledge, and we have the future. So we will get it soon or later. This is our future. This is our right, and we will take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hatem. That was really heartwarming. I think you're right. It's just, I mean, the research in itself did point out that in spite of all of the challenges, 60% young people remain very hopeful about the future, their own future and the future of their country. And I think that, this is as good a note as any to wrap up. I think that there may be a few questions. I'm just going to peruse the chat to see if anybody wants to ask us a question. For those who are listening, please, if you have any questions, do share them with us and I'll put them forward to the panel.
Can I quickly add, someone called Mubarak Osama added a comment, but it wasn't a question. And I think it's a really, really powerful message there. A story of a group of young people who decided to do something for their communities that supports better wash interventions and face a number of sort of barriers to accessing funding. And I think this is a really important message for the international community. We cannot expect someone who has a completely different life, a completely different background to their experience, to be able to meet sharp consultancy level international standards, and sort of write overnight a Gantt chart with a financial breakdown of what they're planning to do. This is an unnecessarily high barrier to receiving funds in Sudan, and it's been the main reason why youth have not had access to this kind of funding. So this is a big message for whoever is willing to hear it, whoever is willing to advocate for it. But we need to make sure that the standards for these grants match the capacity that exists in the country and accurately evaluates experience.
Thank you. That's an excellent point, and I think we have a similar question in the Q&A area. It says, and this is by Saber. It says, thanks to the brilliant panel. I think what we're seeing here is to support the youth after the war, but how do we support them in this time of the war? And I think, Guna, your question somewhat reflects and answers your comment somewhat responds to that question. And you're right, given the extenuating circumstances, I think that, the bar or the criteria has to be sort of adjusted and amended accordingly. But does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Hello. May I share something with you all?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. I was just like coming from a workshop for people with disability. It was we called it the positive pathways for Sudanese youth. That is a program. It's a British Council. It was very warm. How they are hard, their eyes tearing, but they have hope. They create an initiative that help, support, empower people with disabilities here in northern state in Dongola. They are talking about offering people with disabilities some kind of backbone that offer education, access to facilities, access to be like able to share their thoughts in social media, to be able to talk about themselves. So this kind of feeling, this kind of people give us that kind of light, give us the power to keep going. I was staying in Sudan from the day of the conflict till now. The reason why I'm here, this kind of feeling, this kind of people. We've been conduct workshop in Dungla, in Kassala, in like 3 or 4 states. We will meet different youth, different kind of people. They have the same thoughts. They have the same ideas. We'll be here, we'll stay here for our community, we'll help our community, we will start initiative. We will not be forgetting. We will not fight just for our life, we will fight for our communities. So I'm very happy to share this. We're still here, we still have the faith, we still have the hope, and we still have the power.
Yep, I agree with you. Did anyone else want to come in on that before we move on to another question? Right. So there's a question in the chat, and it seems so simple and so straightforward, and it almost makes me feel like, well, yeah, why aren't we doing that? And the question says, can't we just raise the capacity of Sudanese youth to meet international standards? Who wants to take on that one?
I think for me, the question is, what are the international standards? And in a sense, what is the objective of doing that? I think one of the issues that we face is also maybe this is a bit of a theoretical kind of point, but I think the idea that we have to strive for an international ideal is also problematic. And I think the correct focus should be to ask the question of what are the problems in the communities. And I think that's why I'm really keen on local governance and on the model of resistance committees and so on and so forth, because with these types of structures, the focus is on identifying what is needed in the community and then kind of using that as the launch point for what needs to happen next, right? So I think in terms of capacity building, there is also that question of what is this capacity that we are trying to impart to young people.
That's yeah. Mona, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to go through the who, what, when, where, why questions. But in this case in particular, it is worth asking who is setting those international indicators. Because if it is someone who has experienced a sort of conflict, who has actually implemented interventions in a conflict-affected country, then great, they would be slightly more sensitive to the context. But if it is someone who uses the same exact metric to evaluate programs in Venezuela, it's not going to be as relevant to the context. So I do think this is the kind of thing where there is a meet halfway point, where yes, there should be some sort of pairing system where diaspora supports younger populations who want to apply for grants like this. That's the one side, and on the other side, the international standards need to be more sensitive to what the country looks like.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I think that a lot of times we think that there is a certain standard and it's international and so it works for everyone, but the context of it is also really important, and I absolutely agree with you. We're unfortunately going to have to wrap up the conversation now because we're out of time. I just want to thank the panel for joining us, for taking the time out to have this very important discussion and conversation with us. And I would like to thank everyone who joined in and asked questions and left your comments. Thank you so much for your active participation. We hope that you were able to take something away from this. I do want to let you know that this entire discussion was recorded, and this recording is going to be available on YouTube and on the British Council Sudan Facebook page. And we will also share a link to the full research on our Facebook page as well. Thank you once again for joining. It's been wonderful to host this discussion. And on a very positive note, I wish everyone success and peace and prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.